I hold in my hand a list. Incidentally, I shared the beginning of this sermon with a friend who said to me, Steve, you've lived in Appleton for 10 years now, and you realize this is the birthplace of Senator Joseph McCarthy, so you don't start a sermon with, I hold in my hand a list. So, let me start over. I grasp in my fingers a recorded roster of items. It's the packing list for my family's summer vacation this last year in northern Minnesota. Included on this list is everything that we thought we would need on this trip on vacation. So there's fishing poles, there's tackle boxes, there's tennis rackets, there's ball gloves, swimsuits, bug spray, 70 pounds of books and magazines of all sorts. You can probably fill in your own vacation list with it. For years and years as I was growing up, our family would go on this annual pilgrimage to northern Minnesota. There were 5 of us kids along with Mom and Dad, and I loved watching Dad pack all the stuff from the 7 of us into the trunk of his old Ford Galaxie 500. It was like a puzzle, each part carefully placed in the correct spot to minimize its volume and maximize the available space. Sometimes Dad would have to unload and repack 3 separate times before everything would fit. Sometimes he would ask me to jump on the hood in order to get it to latch when everything was in it. So this packing list, taking all that stuff along, finding the right space for it, is a family heritage for me. It's a sacred trust passed down from generation to generation. You know how much of this stuff that we took along we actually used during our vacation? Probably about this much, about a quarter of it. The rest of it, we unpacked and it stayed in the cabin, then we put back in and never really used it. That's not what Jesus wanted, right? At least not according to his packing instructions to the disciples this morning. Here's how it reads in Matthew's gospel. No gold, no silver, no copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, 1 tunic, no sandals, no food. That's an easy packing job, isn't it? It's just crazy, it seems to me, sending folks out without the basic resources they would need to make such a list, to make such a journey. Why do you think Jesus sent them off with such a paltry list, taking such few things along for their journey? Well, one of the reasons certainly might be because Jesus wants us to lead uncluttered lives, free from the weight of stuff that threatens to burst out of our trunks and our car-top carriers, our closets and our basements, heck, even out of the storage units that we're forced to rent when we filled up our houses with our stuff. Jesus might want us to get rid of some of that stuff to see it as unnecessary. It reminds me of the woman who stayed overnight at a convent. She visited the cell of one of the sisters there, visited her room, and sister had been there for over 30 years, and this woman was kind of surprised to see in this room was only a bed, a desk, a Bible, a few items of clothing, and 3 pictures. The woman asked the nun, "Why do you own so few things?" The sister asked a question in return and an answer. "If I went down the hall to your room, I bet I would only find a desk, a bed, a suitcase, a few personal items." The woman answered her back, "Yes, but I don't live here. I'm only passing through." "Me too," said the nun. Jesus might have been reminding us that we're only passing through, that you can't take it with you. So you might as well let go of it right now. Jesus might have been urging upon us a kind of asceticism, living without small comforts and pleasures in order to focus our lives on the big joy of life with God. That makes sense to me. But I don't think that's the only motivation behind this surprisingly sparse packing list for the disciples. He wasn't only asking them to do without things, and certainly not just because religious people should do without things. I think there was something else behind this strange list. In a family trip about 10 years ago, we were initiated into a great tourist fraternity. And I'd like to see how many of you also belong to this great tourist fraternity. So please stand up if you've ever been to Wall Drug in Wall, South Dakota. Stand up. Yeah, this is pathetic, isn't it? I mean, go ahead, sit down. It's amazing to see how many of us have been to this Nowheresville that's 747 miles away. I know that because there's a sign that says Appleton, 475 more miles. Do you know the secret of Wall Drug's success, how we all got sucked into this place? Ted and Dorothy Husted bought the little drugstore in Wall, South Dakota in 1931. There were only 326 people in town when they bought it. It was in the midst of the Depression, 1931, so there were 326 poor people in Wall, South Dakota. Business was terrible. Ted said, 5 years, Dorothy, that's what I think we should give to this place. We'll make a go of it, said Dorothy. And just think, Ted, pretty soon that monument at Mount Rushmore will be done, and then there will be an endless stream of people going by. This is straight out of Guideposts magazine, by the way, so don't expect scintillating dialogue for this. So the 5 years go by. Business has not picked up. On a hot day in July of 1936, Dorothy has an idea. You know what, Ted? I think I've finally seen how we can get all those travelers to come to our store. How's that? Ted asks. Well, what is it that those travelers really want after driving across that hot prairie? They're thirsty. They want water. Ice cold water. Now we've got lots of water and lots of ice. Why don't we put up signs on the highway telling people to come here for free ice water? Listen, I even made up a few lines for the sign. Get a soda, get a root beer, turn to the next corner, just as near Wall Drug. So those of you who have been to Wall Drug know the rest of the story. From free ice water and lots of road signs, they even have a sign up at the South Pole, by the way. Did you know that? Has come an incredible success story. And every bit of that success came from a very simple act of generosity. Kind of reminds you of that verse from Matthew's gospel that comes at the end of the passage we just read of Jesus packing and traveling instructions for the disciples. Jesus says, "And whoever gives you a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of those will lose their reward." Generosity is important. It lies at the heart not just of business success, but more importantly, Christian discipleship. And I believe that these packing instructions that Jesus gives his disciples are really about generosity. And it isn't just about the disciples generously offering the gospel to those they meet. It's the disciples relying on the generosity of others. As Ched Myers puts it, these instructions of Jesus make the missionaries completely vulnerable to and dependent upon the hospitality extended to them. That's what Jesus is asking of them and of us through these packing instructions. Vulnerability, dependence, need. How do you like that? To be honest, I don't. I was raised on an image of rugged individualism. I don't need help from anybody else. I can pull myself up by my own bootstraps. We live by our own smarts and our own native instincts, right? We're all Daniel Boone. We're all John Wayne. We're all Lewis and Clark. And let's just ignore the fact that without Sacagawea, they would have died several times over, okay? We don't want to make ourselves completely dependent, vulnerable to anybody. Of course not. But that's exactly what Jesus is asking us to do. It's consistent with how he lived his life. How interesting and mysterious that God, the one being in all the cosmos that could be completely invulnerable, would make God's self completely vulnerable to us in the person of Jesus Christ. So we're urged to follow the way of mutual vulnerability, the way of generosity. We're urged not only to offer the cup of cold water, but to accept it as well. For isn't that what true generosity is? A meeting of guest and host in which both are fed, both are nurtured. This journey to generosity that we're asking you to embark upon all the time in the church, but especially during this stewardship season, is based on mutual vulnerability. It's based on the sharing of our gifts, our time, talent, and treasure, and the sharing of our needs, our deep-seated, sometimes desperate needs, our need to be useful, for our gifts to impact lives beyond our own, our needs to have hope for the future, a hope that we find fulfilled in the eager faces of our children as they come barreling up for the children's sermon or scrambling off to Sunday school, our need to have unconditional love expressed through our fellow church members who offer us love and trust before they even know us, and through our clergy and lay visitors who come bearing compassion in some of the most difficult and lonely moments of our lives. Our need to change the world experienced through the excitement of our youth as they return from a mission trip, or our young adults ready to make a mark on our world. Our need to have a larger vision than the Fox Cities can provide, a vision expanded with the perspective of our national denominational leaders, our overseas missionaries, our partners in Kenya, Palestine, and beyond. Our need to live by something bigger than ourselves, our own self-interest, our own self-absorption, a need fulfilled by the weekly discipline of worship, where this strange wrestling match between ancient scripture, historic community, chattering news stream, and everyday life is undertaken sermon by sermon by sermon, and a divine centering transcendence is found beyond words in music, image, and mystical presence. Jesus invites us to follow his way, a journey to generosity, discovered in the sharing of gifts and the sharing of needs, based on mutual vulnerability. This life, this journey to generosity, is not one driven by ego or swagger. It's not one guided by grandiose illusions of self-sufficiency. This journey is more like the everyday journey and events and challenges of our lives. You know, those moments when we lock our keys in the car and we borrow a cell phone from a stranger to call a locksmith. Or the times we're broken down by the side of the road and we're grateful for the sight of a state trooper, the same trooper we've been dodging along the highway. Or having somebody in the back of the checkout line pay for our milk, our groceries, because we left our wallet at home. Of being tired and hot and thirsty, and a stranger offering us a cup of cold water. Of sharing our time, talent, and treasure with our church so that our Christian family can share our blessings with community and world. And in all these encounters, we share in the love of God because we can rely on the love of God, who makes it through our journeys and helps us make it through our days. So we're sent out, ill-prepared, under-equipped. We're sent out. And if we're open enough, if we share enough, if we're vulnerable enough, we can discover true generosity. According to Jesus, it's the only way to live. Amen.